Hello. The question we're going to look at today is discuss the view that ethnic inequality is the most important factor affecting the educational attainment of children. So discuss the view. It's got the word view, which tells me it's likely to be a debate. So a for and against argument. The ethnic inequality. So we'll see ethnicity as green. The ethnic inequality is the most important. So gonna do for, against. I always aim for 6, as should you. This side is going to be that ethnic inequality is the most important. That it's the most important factor that will affect the attainment or achievement, that it's more important. This side is going to be the argument, no, other factors are more important. So the ethnicity is not the most important, but instead it would be class or gender. Oops, not ethnicity. So you should always plan your 35 markers. You get 43 minutes. So good 3 minutes of that should be well planned. If you struggle with timing, just bullet point at the end, you'll still get marks. This side is going to be, yes, ethnic inequality is the most important. Institutional racism. That one's going to be a paragraph that absolutely ethnic inequality is the most important due to institutional racism. Going to do Gilbourne. Black males are seen as a threat, disruptive, and are 3 times more likely to be excluded. I'm going to do Pilkington. I always put those two together. There's evidence of racially discriminatory practices in the allocation of pupils to sets. I always put those two together. They're in a paragraph together. I'd normally do Gilbourne and Ball, that cultural capital acts as a shield. But the problem with that, adding that in the knowledge, is, well, that would suggest that class is an important shield, and that goes against the view that ethnicity is the most important. So I'm going to do Gilbourne. I'm going to do Pilkington. And going to add in Shane from subcultural. Again, just the argument that Asian, that's East Asian girls, experienced racism, and that caused them to create anti-school subcultures. You could do Mirza there. Instead, it's up to you. So you can do Shane or Mirza. Those 3, I always aim for 3, as should you. It shows really good range. So this shows that ethnic inequality is the most important factor affecting attainment. Shows that ethnic inequality is the most important factor affecting attainment. Racist practices limits the grades of learners. In bottom set. Racist practices can limit the grades of learners in bottom set and can cause minority groups to disengage as a result of internalization. So absolutely, because it's racism that's limiting the grades of those learners being placed into bottom set, and they're largely going to disengage from education as a result of internalization of failure. You could also note here the fact that they're also likely to be disadvantaged as they're being denied access to the curriculum due to exclusion rates. So it is ethnic inequality that's the most important factor. It's that limits the grades of learners. They can disengage as a result of internalized failure and are denied access to the curriculum due to higher exclusion rates. Remember, Gilbourne notes it's through a perception, the relationship's broken down, and as a result, those learners are not being taught, which is very concerning. In the evaluation, however, we're going to note Mers's evaluation that Black girls work hard to resist racism and racist setting and streaming. Well, Black girls work hard to resist racism and racist setting and streaming and do well in spite of this, suggesting that gender is equally as important as ethnicity. You'll remember part of your targets at the moment are trying to link your evaluation back to the question a little bit to keep the focus of the question throughout. Well, she's suggesting that if Black girls can work hard to resist racist setting and streaming and do well in spite of them, that suggests that gender is equally as important ethnicity. Furthermore, Gilbourne and Ball note that cultural capital is an effective shield. That suggests class is more important. If you've got cultural capital, that suggests class is more important. As you can do as well as students can achieve despite racism with cultural capital. Again, we're trying to link back to the question. I know I've given you 2 evaluation points there, but it gives you a bit of range. We're suggesting in the evaluation, it's not ethnicity, but class or gender that need to be considered that can act as a shield, or you can do well in spite of them if you are female. Okay, yes, ethnicity is more important. You can't experience racism if you are white, but as I say in the evaluation, we're arguing that they are clearly important factors. So no, we're going to argue that class is more important. Here I'm going to do material deprivation because, you know, if you can't concentrate because you haven't had breakfast, regardless of your ethnic origin, that's going to lead with huge issues, learners. So I'm going to do class, but I'm going to say ethnic inequality is not the most important. It is class and material deprivation specifically. Smith and Noble, look at the impact of material deprivation. Oops, look at the impact of material deprivation. So poor diet, poor housing, and poor diet, poor housing. We're going to do Forsyth and Furlong. That the most significant factor, they always go together, those two. Most significant factor deterring working class from university was the cost. That's when they were £3,000 a year. going to do catchment area. So catchment area, so areas with more social deprivation tend to have a higher turnover of teachers, which tends to lead to poorer quality learning. Be very careful. Students that I taught last year will know this. Please do not say that schools in more socially deprived catchment areas just have poor quality learning. Poorer teachers don't just think to themselves, I'm not so great at teaching, let me go to the socially deprived areas. The issue with certain catchment areas is if there's more social deprivation or more poverty, there's now 30 children in a class, 2/3 of which who haven't had breakfast, who have to concentrate on other things. And therefore, that itself and the pressure on those organisations and those teachers, that's what leads to a higher turnover of teachers. So you're getting 3-4 teachers in a year, and therefore the learning is poor quality. It's because you've had 4 teachers, not because schools in socially deprived areas just pick teachers that or employ teachers that aren't as highly impacting. But that's my little note. Just be careful not to offend, particularly examiners that probably work in socially deprived areas. So Smith and Noble, Forsyth and Furlong, and catchment area. I am going to add in Ray. I really have an affinity to Ray, but Professor Diane Ray herself comes from a really socially deprived background, traditional working class. She's a professor at Cambridge, and she found that 97% of the poorest families wanted their children to attend university. Normally use her as evaluation for others. It's the system that's at fault. Oh, sad. Okay, got 3 sociologists. I like catchment area. It's really helpful. It's still knowledge, but I like 3 so I'm trying to give my examiner a reason. Find a reason not to give me full marks is where I'm headed here. So this shows, again, come back to the question, read it every time, that ethnic inequality is not. The ethnic inequality is not the most important factor. Class or poverty is. This can lead to lower rates of concentration, higher rates of sickness, and therefore, so it can lead to lower rates of concentration in class, it can lead to higher rates of sickness, and therefore students will miss valuable content. They'll miss huge chunks of learning. Missing one lesson means that you've missed something that was on the exam. And if you've got poor quality housing, which has led to much higher rates of sickness, then what's going to happen is you're going to miss things that will come up in the exam and underachieve. Evaluation. However, the best evaluation we can give is we know that statistically our Bangladeshi community experience the worst poverty of any ethnic group. So we know that our Bangladeshi community experience the worst poverty of any ethnic group, but they perform above national benchmarks and above white British. This suggests poverty cannot possibly be the only factor. It's the best evaluation. Some ethnic groups statistically experience the worst poverty and they are above the benchmarks. Material deprivation can't be the only thing. And that's not, again, I say this quite a lot, it's not to deny Marcus Rashford his contribution in forcing governments to pay for children to eat. But it can't be the only factor and not the only thing that should be considered. But thanks anyway. So that's paragraph 2. We're going to go back to paragraph 3. Just checking it was still recording, otherwise that would be tricky. Paragraph 3, we're going to do ethnocentric curriculum. And I just take this from, in my mind, sections of the grid or sections of the grid. So the ethnocentric curriculum suggests that, and always read the question each time, that ethnic inequality is the most important factor. We're going to do chord. There is an ethnocentric curriculum. I'm going to do Tickley et al. That Black youth in particular resent the invisibility and being reduced to a study on slavery. So why quite a lot of it, why a lot of history can't use colonialism as British history. That's the argument there, really. Okay, I've only got the 2 sociologists for ethnocentric curriculum. I'm not doing too bad. I've got 3 there in catchment area, but I've just got those 2 there. So tried my best for 3. It's not possible in this one. If you think of any, please feel free to add them in. But this shows that ethnic inequality is the most important factor. Affecting the, slowing down, affecting the attainment of children. I haven't said the whole thing for a while. Affecting the attainment of children because the curriculum can alienate minorities. It can alienate minorities and be unfamiliar, and therefore can put people of colour at a disadvantage. If you don't know divorced, beheaded and died, divorced, beheaded, it puts you at a disadvantage. And it can be alienating. It can alienate minorities who disengage. And it can be unfamiliar and therefore can put people of colour at a disadvantage. I give you the divorced, beheaded, died example, reducing women to a rhyme. But anyway, so, however, for Lynch, material deprivation is more important than any cultural differences, as this can affect attendance and concentration. It's a bit tricky, that one, with the ethnocentric curriculum to evaluate. Suppose I could, to be fair, do Mirza and pop that there. Maybe leave Gilbourne and Ball there. But it's quite tricky to evaluate against the ethnocentric curriculum with named. Could use gender, or could just argue that material deprivation is the one that's going to mean they're less likely to be able to attend or concentrate. It's a slight little repetition there, but still named evaluation and keeping focus on the terms of the question. Okay, we're going to go back again. So we've got yes, ethnicity, no, class, yes, ethnicity, the curriculum, and then we're going to say no, it is gender. So it's not ethnicity that is the most important factor, but gender affects the attainment of children. So we're going to do Mitos and Brown, that teachers give boys more leeway. They expect lower standards of work and allow them to underachieve as a result. It doesn't always feel like that, but the more teachers have higher standards of you, expect higher standards and push you, the better you will do. So if we give them more leeway or we expect lower standards, we're happy when they get 4, then we ultimately allow them to underachieve. We've got Sewell. There's been a feminization of education, and it serves to give girls an advantage with role models. Feminization of education, but serves to give girls an advantage, but boys can feel alienated as a result. My third, going to do Epstein, so Professor Becky Epstein. She heads up the Educational Endowment Fund. Very good organization. Epstein found that working class boys often experience homophobic bullying and being negatively labeled if they are hardworking or engaged. Okay, at the end of that paragraph, again, I like 3, it gives good range. This shows that ethnic inequality is not the most important factor affecting attainment. Because both peers and teachers can disadvantage boys regardless of ethnic origin. Because both peers and teachers can disadvantage boys regardless of ethnic origin. It can make boys unwilling to engage through fear of bullying from peers. Yeesh. So it's not ethnicity, it's gender regardless of ethnic origin, because peer groups, boys may be unwilling to engage, particularly if they're likely to experience homophobic bullying when they do so. Sad state of affairs. So, however, gender has the lowest attainment gap. It has the lowest attainment gap, about 9.1%. Both class and ethnic inequality have much higher rates of inequality. Gender has the minimal impact. Appreciate you have to be intersectional and connect the 3, but it really does have the minimal impact. Therefore, this suggests that ethnic inequality is more important than gender. Try and bring that to the question. Okay. Back for the question, I'm going to do language and ethnicity. So, Modud. South Asian groups often have an issue with a lack of fluency, particularly when English isn't spoken at home. So Madood, lack of fluency. Laboff supports this point, arguing again that language and ethnicity has a greater impact. So I've only got the 2 there for language, particularly for South Asian groups. That's Black youth. Yeah, Black youth have good linguistic skills. If encouraged. So this shows that ethnic inequality is the most important factor affecting attainment in education, as some students may struggle to understand teachers, textbooks, and exam questions. So those of you will notice that I'm taking the usefulness that I've given you, but I'm adapting it to fit the question. That's fine. That's actually a good thing to do if it's relevant. You see how I haven't put there at all? It can explain why some students may struggle to understand. I'm linking it that it is ethnicity that's the most important because of someone's ethnic origin, they may struggle to understand teachers or textbooks or the exam questions. When you get into the exam, that you might get, I don't know, consensus and it wasn't on the specification, and now you're all confused at the exam questions. It's a disadvantage if an exam board use questions that aren't on the spec and, you know, communicate in those elaborate language codes. It's a disadvantage. So, however, on that elaborate and restricted language codes, I'm going to use Bernstein, who notes that, however, for Bernstein, working class groups are also disadvantaged by language codes. And if the education system communicates in elaborate, this will disadvantage working class groups, suggesting it is not just minorities who are disadvantaged. Okay. So we've done language as ethnicity. Against, I'm going to do, no, it's not ethnicity that is the most important factor, but it is cultural factors. Going to do Bourdieu, cultural capital. Again, with your foie gras and your tiny portions, and your 5 different silver forks connected to a particular course. So you've got Bourdieu and cultural capital. Also, one of my favourite concepts, symbolic violence, where working class culture is often devalued. And habitus, the expectations of your social group. Which university? Which one are you going to? Why are you going to college? Where's that going to end up? The expectations of your social group can either be an advantage or can be a disadvantage. Gerwitz. It is both cultural capital and material deprivation. It's actually standing in between Bourdieu and Smith and Noble saying, look, you're both right. You're both right. And you can also do Sugarman there, that working class don't tend to defer gratification. They tend to be very present time orientated. I think about now, I would note that's often because they don't have the privilege to think about the future, but they are good terms and help us consider some kind of cultural elements, I suppose. So this shows that it is not ethnic inequality. This shows, sorry, ethnic inequality. This shows ethnic inequality is not the most important factor affecting attainment. Cultural factors can give an advantage and encourage learners to invest in their future selves and therefore work harder in lessons. However, that's a tricky one. However, cultural factors, what I might be better off doing there, actually, apologies for the rejigging of your handwriting. I think it's also why it's a good idea to plan. I think Lynch is going to need to go there as the evaluation, because he's arguing that material is always more important than cultural. So I'm going to move him there. And then it's a good job I gave 2 evaluations. That work. Material is more important than any cultural differences. Yes, it works. And then I'm going to move Mirza there. Yes. There we go. Black girls work hard to resist racist setting and streaming. So I might have to doubt that black girls work hard to resist racist setting and work hard to resist an ethnocentric curriculum. And do well in spite of it. There we go. Phew. Now I've got named evaluation in each one, and I just make sure it flows. Again, that's why it's a really good idea to plan them, because you're normally quite limited on what you can do on the evaluation. Right, in a conclusion, I reach a judgment. In this sociologist opinion, is ethnic inequality the most important factor? So to conclude, is it the most important factor? Yeah, I think it is. Ethnic inequality is the most important factor. It can lead to lower sets, limiting the grades of learners, higher rates of exclusion, and it can cause alienation from a curriculum that focuses on white achievements and ignores the horrors of Britain's colonial history. and ignores the horrors of Britain's colonial history. However, we cannot ignore the impacts of material deprivation on all learners, or the impact that higher expectations can have on achievement. And this is both teachers and government's responsibility. So I make my point. Ethnic inequality is the most important. This is what it can lead to. And I'm summarizing all the things that it can cause. I personally, without saying personally, I think that there needs to be more discussion of Britain's colonial history. We can learn British history, but not learn a version of it that's all about achievement from white groups. However, we also can't ignore material deprivation, and it's a government responsibility to spend our money on our children. And, teachers do need to consider that their higher expectations, that they drive up learners' achievement, is what's important as well. So I make my judgment here. In an introduction, you outline. So we would say, some have argued that ethnic inequality is the most important. Due to, and I'd add in some key stats. I always really think it's a good idea to include any stats in an introduction, 49% versus the average. The most important due to the ethnic inequality stats, and this has been argued to be the result of institutional racism, curriculum issues, and language barriers. But that would be to view ethnicity in a vacuum and not consider the roles that material deprivation play on all, or the role of teachers and expectations, which have an impact upon anyone. So introduction outlines, I'd say always with the stats, always try and include some stats in an intro. Those ones from education should ideally roll off quite easily. And then I've got my paragraphs, and then I make my judgment in my conclusion. Apologies about rejigging that evaluation for anyone handwriting. I know it's probably a bit of a pain, but do what you can. Okay, any questions at all, just let me know, and I will see you next lesson or next video.